stance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. Can I just ask the team at the back there, do we have any comments or questions from the ether? Okay, fine. Well, in which case, let's start with people here. Simon's in there early. Let's do a round, and then possibly, depending on, we've only got 20 minutes, so possibly we'll just take a lot of comments and questions from the floor, and then we'll come back to the panel in one go. Simon.
Yeah, I'm Simon Maxwell. I chair the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. I've always been a vertical funds sceptic, even though it is in very good hands like Nick's. I'm tempted to say that it's really displacement activity, disguising the fact that donors have not lived up to their Copenhagen commitment to provide new and additional finance on a significant scale, and we certainly see that in the European context. DFID is always the exception. So what's the question that we really struggle with? I think Paul, although I agree with almost everything he said, actually leads us in a slightly wrong direction by talking about this as a portfolio management decision, because that's not the question. The question is, should we create a new vertical fund and therefore create a new portfolio within which we have to choose? And what none of you have quite really nailed, it seems to me, is the question of why do ministers constantly create new vertical funds? You know, partly it's displacement activity. Partly, and Paul said this in the side, it's a really easy and good political thing to do because it looks highly plausible. Does it generate additional money? I don't think we know that. So I think, and I can think of 3 or 4 other reasons why one might create an additional fund. Maybe it's because it's a more efficient way of dispersing aid. I'd like you to reflect, if you would, as a panel, on why would you set about creating a new vertical fund?
Do you not think then that the Global Fund or the Gavi have had significant results because of the way they've been set up?
Well, what's the counterfactual? I mean, if the counterfactual is that there was a real commitment to the MDGs and additional money was available because of the financing for development commitment and the money had gone into the World Bank or the WHO or the UNDP, we could have achieved the same objectives. That's the proposition.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Gianni Ruta, and I'm doing my PhD at the Grantham Research Institute, and I am sabbatical from the World Bank, where I've been working on the IDA replenishment, specifically on climate change. So we took there one of our arguments was that mainstreaming funds or broad funds like IDA are ideal for adaptation, for example. So here it comes the question, and particularly I'm thinking of Nick and Richard if they can chip in their answers, is we've struggled for the last, let's say, 5 years to put adaptation alongside with mitigation when we talk about climate change. 5 years ago, climate change was only mitigation. Now climate change finally is adaptation and mitigation. And I wonder if this is sort of firing back to us when we talk about the Green Climate Fund. And specifically the question we are tackling today on vertical funds. Should we treat adaptation and mitigation separately when we think whether our funding for adaptation and or mitigation should be vertical or not? We can make a lot of examples of why the case should be in one way or the other, but at least is this on the table? Are we allowing us that degree of freedom in the current discussions?
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I mean, yes, over there. I'm interested in why, is there a choice between vertical and horizontal? Because Simon's come out and said really not really for a new vertical fund at all. Is that a possibility?
Rachel Rank from Publish What You Fund. Picking up on Paul's comments about the need for some form of inclusive governance and accountability, I wondered what lessons can be learnt from recent efforts to establish a best practice standard for aid information that might be useful for climate finance, specifically referring to the International Aid Transparency Initiative.
Okay, well that brings us into the territory of whether climate finance should be treated as aid. And Andy.
Yes, thanks very much. Really interesting presentations, but a very broad range of things. Sometimes I think maybe touching on different areas two issues. One is a very simple question to Nick, which is if the new fund worked well, would there be a possibility of reducing the number? I mean, some of these 22, 23, 24 that exist, I could see a very strong rationale for the global fund if it could consolidate some of the kind of rather confusing array of instruments that are out there. The second question is just a very basic one, which is to what extent can you separate accounting for an intent from delivering for a result? Because there are obviously compelling political reasons why you have to be able to account for some of the intent of climate action separately from ODA.
I think possibly as well as making up the phrase "think twice," I think Paul Eisenman might have come up with the idea that if you create a new vertical fund, you should get rid of at least two. Was that you?
No, but I'd be happy to go along even with three.
Yes.
It's been raised. Carl Schultz with Climate Adaptation Works. It's been raised, but hasn't really been tackled head on. It seems to me a big question is sort of both deployment capacity and absorptive capacity, certainly on mitigation, but even more so perhaps for adaptation for a set of interventions that we're not even really sure of what they're going to be now. Hundreds or thousands of different subspecies of activities done by a fund. It seems like it could play a role at certain things like vaccination, where it's been noted it's relatively straightforward. But I'm just wondering, well, to what extent can you really tackle this variety of actions and do it from a donor to a government as opposed to looking at alternative means and deploying? I mean, there's been talk about private leverage, sure, but that's generally, I think, viewed as, well, let's hope that the private sector can come in with lots of cash, you know. But what about in terms of, broadly speaking, the expertise, the ability, the development, the project development skills and all these? I'm just wondering, how can it really do this for so many interventions?
One aspect that I think is a part of the discussion on climate finance is, apart from the setting up a fund, is the idea that there will be some kind of international coordination. I think that's in the papers, in the agreements. Now, again, I don't know if that's a sensible thought, if it's at all plausible. Dirk and Sheila.
Yeah, Dirk de Velde, ODI. One thing that I want to put on the table is not just the issue of horizontal versus vertical, but also about how a vertical fund would be used, and in particular thinking about the differences in sort of sectors like health and education, where the traditional thinking was about delivering development. You deliver something, and vis-a-vis financing for infrastructure and private sector issues, and that is a very different animal. And it's basically, rather than delivering, you actually need to incentivize the private sector, and those two are very different things. And I think that's something that the climate finance literature does need to take on board. That it's not just about sort of learning lessons from health and education. It's also about how do you leverage in the private sector, and from that we can learn, because climate finance has been provided for many decades. I mean, there have been projects that have helped energy efficiency. Hydropower plants have been financed, and so on. And I think that is something where you can learn the lessons. And mitigation is still important. Even though adaptation might be important, but mitigation is going to be important. Energy efficiency might help development as well. So even in low-income countries, I don't think you should forget about that. So and that's very much about empowering the private sector to do things, and that requires a fundamentally different approach. And it is about projects. It is not about architectures and so on. The private sector doesn't like necessarily always architectures, funds, and all of those things. They need to have access to development finance, and it is about competition. Fragmentation is almost a good thing for them, for the private sector, because you compete and you get better service when you compete. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. Aid for Trade, so you take
I will mention it, but Sheila Page, ODI. I wanted to raise a couple of things. I mean, Richard commented on Nick. I'd be interested in Nick commenting on Richard, because to me, your two criteria for vertical funds seemed fundamentally opposed. Richard argues that they're good for quite specific things where you can mobilize funds for whether it's bed nets or vaccination. Absolutely clear problem and an absolutely clear solution. Climate change doesn't, and also relatively small scale. Climate change, Nick argued, should be vertical because it is large and because it's complex. Now, maybe you're both right, but I would like a little bit of reconciliation there. On the more general issue of horizontal versus vertical, to me, the main reason that vertical funds are, the reason for vertical funds, the reasons they are now fashionable, is precisely so people who still need to pay lip service to the Paris Principles, which I fortunately have never done, can get around them. I mean, Nick gave this away by saying that one of the purposes of the vertical fund would be to change the culture with respect to climate change, the culture of the countries. Now, that is not quite the way I would understand the approach to the Paris Principles. I'm not criticizing him for that, but I am saying that it should be quite clear that the vertical funds have a different purpose. They are to embody either donor or international objectives or foundation objectives, as the case may be. They're specifically not to embody country objectives, and we should be quite clear that that is one of the differences between them. It's not a question of finding marginal things. And at Dirk's request, to me, when Nick gave his 5 reasons why climate change should have vertical funds, I was testing each of them against trade, and trade would have met not scale, but certainly the other 4. And yet, at the time, every donor agency, led by DFID, was very strongly against a vertical fund for aid for trade because it should be mainstreamed into development. It was impossible to separate trade from the rest of development. Again, I'd like a reconciliation of climate change and trade.
Thanks very much. Very interesting questions and comments. We'll take a couple more because they're very interesting in it. Then we'll come back to the panel.
Just a quick one. James Hewitt, Independent. If one wishes to change the culture of the discussion, perhaps first of all we should reduce our own emissions from consumption here first. If we don't do that, then I think we're on a hiding to nothing. If we do that, then the quantity of aid, climate change finance that we're going to have to disperse will be much reduced. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You should have a look at my blog, Climate Finance Bribery Won't Work. Over here, please.
Well, that's a good feed. And I'm Lisa Elgas from Transparency International. And I have one question, and well, actually 2 questions, but one very practical one. On the transitional committee, I'd like to have an idea of the schedule of meetings that are planned until COP17 and the possibility that civil society can contribute to either the government positions on how that fund should be developed or directly through participation in meetings. The other question I have is, as we've been discussing quite a bit about using public finance to leverage private sector investment and private sector resources to meet climate change adaptation and mitigation objectives, has any thought or consideration gone into then an accountability framework or climate governance, corporate governance framework that would then impact on private sector behavior? Because in essence, they would be infused with public financing as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other quick comments before we come back to the panel? No. Okay. Well, let's go back in reverse order. If that's all right, Neil. No, you okay? Yeah. Okay. Well, in which case we'll go to Paul. I mean, just my couple of comments, and you of course just comment on absolutely anything you choose. But I suppose my questions are: are the vertical fund skeptics right, or is this kind of feeling that perhaps there is something in vertical funds after all that appears to be re-emerging, as I say, in some of the Paris debate? Do they have something as well? And I just comment that, Richard, I think I got this right when we were chatting over lunch. You were implying that the Global Fund was responding to some of the Paris Principles in quite a good way, especially with regard to country systems. Possibly, I said this, better than a lot of bilaterals. And the other bigger question, linking to some of what Dirk was saying, is should we be trying to bureaucratise climate finance in the way that Paris tried to bureaucratise aid at an international level, or should we be more like, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom, it's going to happen anyway, there's huge amounts of money going to be flowing across the world, most of it private, let's face it, in which case my instinct would be strengthen local, national level management of flows coming in rather than try to organise it at a global level. But of course, say whatever you want to. We've got about 5 minutes. That doesn't mean each. Paul.
Okay, well, I will be very quick. You know, vertical funds are here to stay. We may like them, we may not like them, and vertical funds, like horizontal funds, there's good ones and there's bad ones and there's ones in between in terms of their value added. In this case, I think the Green Climate Fund is an attempt either to regroup existing ones, which probably won't happen, but at least to prevent proliferation of 50 different ones. And if the speaker to the right is correct that these are there for the good of the donors or of the world and not of the countries, well, just imagine if you had 50 different ones going this way and that way. The only other point I want to comment on is the person from Publish What You Fund. You know, transparency is one of those issues that makes you realize you shouldn't worry too much about whether it's aid or FRED or something else. Of course there should be transparency. And of course the Paris principles, you know, if the government doesn't believe in something and isn't putting its commitment behind it, it's unlikely to happen over the long run. So I think we need to get over this thing about, well, it's aid and therefore you do it this way, and it's not aid and anything goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Richard?
Well, I think that Sheila and Simon have a very reasonable point that the automatic assumption one needs a vertical fund to deal with climate is something that needs to be tested pretty hard, and I can see that part of this is around the wish to demonstrate additionality as opposed to accounting for intent, as one of the questioners put it. I think, Andy, you said this. I mean, you could, and no doubt donors can, will, and do, badge lots of things to cover lots of purposes, and I'm sure that it goes on that way, but to my mind, the international community's got past that point. There is going to be, there is already 20-odd funds doing this. There's going to be a green fund of some sort. So I think the job is now to make it work as well as we can. And I do think that, you know, a good point was made by Jan over there about, you know, whether adaptation and mitigation really fit the same way. Mitigation lends itself better to a kind of global fund approach because you can imagine a large enough thing which can negotiate with the private sector on a reasonable basis, develop some expertise in how you incentivize things, and have a way of doing business. I mean, you might say that this is what the IFC and various other things are for already, but you know, if we have something which is focused on this, I can see that working. I do have a much harder time seeing how you deal with adaptation, which is surely in the bloodstream of anybody who's ever designed a project at any sort. So I think that's tricky. I do think there's an issue which what kind of organisation is going to run this? And this comes back to my question about is the financing agency model going to be fit for purpose for this? And it's a tough question. I mean, I think it's worth looking in some detail at why the GEF hasn't done a better job, despite the way it's set up. And I think one needs to test a number of things about how we can do this, how we can do it better in the future. Exactly what role civil society should play in this particular one is an interesting question. I mean, I'm, as you saw from what I said, I'm rather positive about the role civil society has been playing in the health funds. Not everybody is, but I think there's been a lot of positive lessons learned about that. But don't forget, here we're talking less about service delivery and more about projects, something that many people have forgotten about. But there's a lot of this going to be investment stuff, which is rather different from, I mean, there's very important issues, civil society, but they're slightly different from the delivery side. And I agree with what's been said about aid transparency and the rest of it. I mean, this thing is going to have to be highly transparent, whether it's ODA or not, and I'm sure all governments will make sure it is ODA. You know, it's going to have to basically meet the same kind of standards, and we should be writing that into the genes of the thing and make sure it does it.
Thank you. Nick.
Yeah, let me pick up on three of them. First of all, I hope I'm not misleading you, Sheila, about what I said about culture. The point I'm making is not that this fund should be used to change culture, but if we are going to have a transformation that we think we need in climate change, the world has got to think about climate differently. There's got to be leadership on climate which doesn't exist. There's got to be recognition about the importance of climate change. So it's that kind of culture that, you know, the world needs to wake up to this, and I don't think funding itself will do that. Am I about to waste my time for the next 6 months, as Simon implies, in terms of designing and setting up something that isn't needed? I mean, I think one thing we shouldn't assume here, we know what the answer is in terms of how this thing is going to land. There are a huge range of options here, from a light touch supervisory function to a new institution with its own capital base. I mean, that whole range, and I'm sure over the next 6 months, there's going to be a huge range of options laid on the table. You know, is it going to be a wholesaler of funds or a retailer of funds? So, you know, we shouldn't necessarily assume that the answer is going to be a vertical fund here anyway. But that's why, answering your question to some respect, Simon, that's why we've started from the point of, well, is there a problem we're trying to fix here? Let's do the analysis of what is out there, and if we were to design something new, how would it fit, and what are the current challenges that we'd want to try and fix? And I think that's the key question for me. And I mean, no one yet has come back to me to say you've got it wrong or you've got it right, but I wouldn't mind a debate on that in terms of whether we think we have got those right. That does also relate to the lessons that we've learned from Paris and Accra. So, you know, what is the problem we're trying to fix? Because this thing is going to happen. It's a reality. It's set up by the UNFCCC. 40 people are there trying to design it. So let's design it at least so it adds value rather than takes away value. Transparency, yeah, absolutely, couldn't agree more. And transparency is going to be critical. In terms of civil society schedule meetings, actually, I wish I knew. When we do know about the schedule of meetings, the next one's going to be in Japan, then Geneva, then probably South Africa. When the dates will be available, we will make those available. I'm having debates with civil society in the UK on this to get people's views to say what's happened in the various meetings. Civil society organisations are going to be active observers during the transitional committee, and I hope that they will find space and will find ways to integrate them in the workstream work. So yes, let's get everybody involved. We need a complete diversity of opinion thrown into this melting pot if we're going to do the best job that we can. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you to all the panellists. Very interesting. I'm still deeply confused. I think we should take Nick up on his invitation to get engaged in British government policy towards the fund going forward. All those points, I didn't take them down. I'm hoping to photocopy your notes later, and maybe we can engage on that. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to the panellists again.